After I blacked out during an X-ray, I was taken to a room that was only semi-private and deserted. It was close to 10 o'clock at night. I can still vividly recall how bone-chillingly cold the hospital floor was while they were helping me into bed. It was the beginning of summer, and I had worn flip-flops to the hospital. Because of this, my feet were exposed, and I was shocked to find that the floor in the hospital room was quite chilly. In addition to that, I became aware of how unclean my feet were. Since then, I have not been able to forget about it. It was quite dark since the lights had been turned off, and everything was very quiet because it was nighttime. I was lying in my hospital bed by myself. I couldn't get to sleep for what seemed like forever. I was writhing and turning in my sleep. My hand was bandaged, and I was receiving antibiotics through an IV. After that, I felt as like I was going to pass out once more, just like I did during the X-ray. As a result, I made the decision to make an effort to combat the experience since I found it unpleasant, even though I knew I couldn't lose my balance again. The sensation of being dizzy and whirling about was unsettling. After rolling onto my left side, I reached for the side rail of the bed. After the feeling had faded, I got the impression that I had recovered from passing out. After rolling onto my back, I came to the startling realization that I was no longer present in my body. My initial impression was one of something quite weird. I had no sensation whatsoever in my body, yet I was aware that I was not paralyzed. I sat up and had the impression of moving through a warm wall of gel as I did so. I am at a loss for words to adequately express it. Comparable to a thick, warm shampoo. A complete mystery. It was neither solid nor liquid. Rather, it was more like a combination of the two states. After making sure there was no discomfort, I unhooked my legs from the bed and stood up. After that, I became aware that the floor of the medical facility was no longer chilly. The warmth of the floor was far beyond my ability to feel. I was able to see my body lying on the bed. Yet I did not feel terrified of it, nor was I disturbed by the fact that I was not inside of it. It was the same feeling you get when you step out of your automobile for the first time. Because it is there and because it is parked, you no longer give it any thought. I wasn't the least bit concerned about it. It wasn't terrifying at all, and I never found myself becoming anxious about it. At that time, the space began to get more expansive. It evolved while also growing in size. My hospital room had a curtain that had been hanging from the ceiling at one point, but it was not on a rack to my left or in front of me when I entered. It seemed as if we had been transported back in time. A bright yellow lung machine appeared out of nowhere and was placed against the far wall. And the size of the window that was cut into the wall had increased as well. It felt like I was watching a scene from a movie from the 1940s, but at the time, I didn't pay any attention to any of that detail. It was just accepted as though this were the standard for the situation. Nothing I saw was ever alarming or frightening. Now, I was sitting by myself in the hospital room when all of a sudden, there was a man in front of me. He was dressed in a medical gown and had his back turned to me when I approached him. To my great relief, I was unable to view the rear of it, lol. However, I was unfamiliar with him despite the fact that he appeared to be in his late 60s. I never once questioned the purpose of his being in my bedroom. After then, there was complete and utter darkness. The deepest dark ever. I don't remember ever being afraid that I might go blind abruptly. I just remember accepting the fact that everything became black. I can recall holding my hand in front of my face to test whether or not I could see it, but I was unsuccessful. I was aware that I was still upright. And I was also aware that I had not left the confines of the hospital room in which I was located. I was still sitting on the edge of the bed and hadn't moved an inch from there. However, there was no light in any of the rooms. The word room is not appropriate. It refers to a region. I was able to tell that it was both enormous and nearby at the same time. There was not a single sound to be heard. There was no sound, and I was alone in the room with no other inhabitants. Nothing unusual was going on with me. It was like waiting for the school bus or for my mother to come pick me up from after school, with all the excitement and anticipation that entails. It wasn't alarming, and I didn't have any anxiety about it. I had a thought about the children at the school who used to tease me on the playground for not getting baptized and tell me that I was going to be cast into a lake of fire for not being baptized like them. I had this thinking about those children. I found myself asking God. At that point, a door sprang out of nowhere. In the darkness, a door that was cracked open completely. It was around 500 feet away from me at the time. And the moment I had that idea, I was right there at the door. It was as if it had happened in slow motion. When I put my hand on the doorknob, I had the sensation that I was entering the house in which I had previously resided. It was cozy and inviting, and I felt like I was home even if I could not understand why the door was installed in that location. As soon as I opened the door, I could see that the room was completely white. The very first thing that caught my attention was the absence of the seam that usually exists between the floor and the wall. That seemed to me to be somewhat peculiar. My eyes led me towards what appeared to be the direction of the corner, yet there was neither a sharp edge nor a corner there. After that, I continued gazing up the wall, trying to find a joint or seam where the two walls meet, but I couldn't see it. My intellect was still very young, so everything seemed extremely strange to me. I had never seen anything like it before, and when I raised my head to gaze up the wall, I saw the ceiling of heaven. It was a blue sky, just as vast and magnificent as the sky above our heads, but strangely brighter and more vivid than the sky above our heads. I don't remember ever seeing a sky quite like it before or after. It was a monster. This is so enormous that we just do not have the vocabulary to adequately explain it. It was as vast as the space above your own head right at this moment. It was big. There were several birds and white fluffy clouds, and when I approached the edge of it, I observed that it was bordered by crown molding. When I followed the beauty of the scrolling with my eyes, I saw that it was held up by a big beam that had a carving of a carousel on it, comparable to the rod that is driven into the horse that you ride. Again, there was no fear. I had no idea where I was, and I just acknowledged all that I was witnessing and going through at the time. I had no idea that I had died and gone to heaven. It was at this time when the male angel appeared. At this point, all communication is conducted through the use of telepathy. They did not communicate in the same manner that we do. This was entirely a mental process. I was acutely aware of every word, nuance, gesture, and mood that was being conveyed. He did not enter the room in any of the following ways: by poofing, walking, or flying in. Even if he had wings, he couldn't fly. He appeared to be someone who lived in my area based on the way he was dressed. He had a really alluring appearance. He made me think of a guy I had a thing for who went to my school. He was imposing in stature, with blonde hair and a gruff appearance. I could see the white undershirt coming out from behind the red flannel shirt that he was wearing. And he was also wearing 501 Levi's trousers and black Converse high-top sneakers. This, of course, sparked my curiosity because, at the time, everyone was sporting a pair of white Reebok high tops, and I believed that he was making a very questionable fashion choice. After hearing this, he gave me a smile and asked, "Do you want to stay? Or do you wish to remain here?" And in an instant, I got the impression that I had an infinite amount of time to make my decision. Instantaneously, I recalled thinking about my mom. During that moment, my thoughts kept going back to my mother. I walked in on her as she was on the phone in the living area of our house. She was trying to obtain word from my father that I was coding and that they were doing everything they could. My father came into my room and discovered me dead in my bed. I was able to sense my mother's anxiety and the pain that she felt from the possibility that she would lose me. It gave rise to the worry that she could be dissatisfied if I remained in paradise. If I stayed, would I miss my mom an unreasonable amount? And if I stayed, would she have a problem with me bothering her? As I continued to turn that idea over in my head, the image of a female angel appeared. She had blonde hair, was noticeably shorter than I was, and was wearing a dress of the same color. She did not have any wings either. It wasn't until later that I realized I was communicating with what I refer to as angels. Then she made a comment. "You don't need to worry about that. Your connection with your mother will change later on," she told me. And instantaneously, I had no more anxieties about what my mother thought of, or how she felt about my choice, and the scene of her on the phone with my dad stopped. At this time, I was completely clueless regarding where I was, who I was speaking with, or what was taking place. I didn't find myself to be befuddled either. Everything was just accepted as if it were the most typical occurrence in the history of the planet. And at that moment, I had to choose whether to continue living with these individuals in this location or to return to my life on Earth. At this point, an extremely strange occurrence started to take place. I felt like I was existing in two different worlds at the same time. It's not like my spirit was shattered or anything like that. Simply the fact that I was present. At the same moment, there was another version of me. The former version of me was older, more experienced, and more knowledgeable than I now am. I refer to it as flight control, due to the fact that it appears as though they are the control tower. It is difficult to describe. Both the part of myself that was making the choice of whether to remain or leave, as well as the other part of me that was already present. I was aware that this was a long-term commitment, and I have never left this location. It is difficult to express or give a description of. While the angel, who was opposed to me coming back to Earth and didn't want me to go back at all, shouted against me going back, the other half of me argued with reasons why I should go back to Earth. I said to myself, I still need to have my son. And in that moment I realized that one of the reasons I was sent on this earth was to have my son. To become his mother and to bring him up was a driving motivation in life. There was no mention of who his father would be or anything else of the kind. All I was told was that I needed to conceive a boy and bring him up. I was also aware that this was happening much later in my life, when I was in my 30 I secured it with a safety pin. The angel then remarked, "Your life will always be a battle." And that was the end of their conversation. My initial thinking and inquiry was, for food. Because I'm only 17 years old and don't have much of a brain to begin with. There was no response to the question shelter, but I was aware that the difficulty would not be caused by a lack of resources. such as cash, food, or anything else of a monetary or material nature. Rather, it would be the result of something else, and it was approaching quickly. After then, the angel spoke to me and said, "There are decisions you may make in life that could end up costing you your very being." And once more, I was completely clueless about what exactly that meant. 0. I was perplexed as I stood there. The angel revealed to me the word war. In this video, I was an older version of myself who was living on Earth. I was a lot older back then, and I was jogging with a group of individuals who were being led by a soldier. However, I was unable to place the outfit that he was wearing. The hue was khaki, and the uniforms that our service members in the United States military wore were olive green. Therefore, what you said made no sense. I noticed the person was carrying a weapon, and everyone was trying to get away to a safe location. I could see the smoke, hear the gunshots, and see the sandbags and block walls that we were attempting to flee towards while we were being pursued by the enemy. And the soldier was carrying a rectangular backpack on his back, which made me think of the troops who fought in World War I. But the fact that it was so square and didn't have rounded edges made it difficult to understand. After that, the scene came to a close. This female angel who was showing me all of this was being halted by a person who neither I nor anybody else could see or hear. They were having a conversation, and I knew it had something to do with my free will if she showed me any more of what they were discussing if she continued to reveal it to me. There was no condemnation, judgment, or admonition leveled towards the individual who arrived, and they did not reveal who they were. The woman I was speaking to at this moment was standing in front of a very long sheet that was hanging from a clothesline. I could not make out the faces of the about 80 individuals who were standing behind her a short distance away, but I knew they were there to greet me when I arrived, and I could feel from this woman a grandmotherly, aunt sort of feeling, very caring, and that we had known each other for eons, not just years or decades, but eons before the world was formed, and that she had my best interest at heart. And I could feel that we had known each other for eons, not just years or decades, but eons before the world was formed. Then the other side of me, the one I was talking about before, stood out and said, "I have a lot of work to do," and my immediate response was, "Digging ditches." After that, I conceded that I did have a lot of work to do on Earth, despite the fact that I had no idea what that job was. After that, I got the sense that I was falling, and then I was smashed with great force into my body while I was lying in my hospital bed. My father had a grip on my foot and an expression of extreme concern and anxiety on his face as he looked down at me. A face that I had never seen before or since, a look that I would not want on any parent, and this was a look that my father, a World War II Pearl Harbor survivor, wore. The nurse greeted me with a welcome back. She gave me a concerned glance before turning to my father and assuring me that my grandfather will be okay. And then they started to remove the stickers off my body. Throughout all of these years, I have kept this occurrence in my memory. My anger at my sister, which had been the source of our many disagreements, had dissipated. After that, we never had another fight. My father was never informed about my near-death experience. I had my doubts that he would accept my explanation. He died in 1997. I never disclosed to my fiancée in 1990 the identity of the person who was brutally killed 5 months after we became engaged, simply because I knew how religious he was and didn't think he'd take my word for it. That was the hardship the angel was trying to tell me about. And now I understand what she meant. The anguish of having one's heart broken. What are the options available to us, which might end up costing me my own soul? In 1998, when I was 34 years old, I gave birth to my son. Now 23 years old, my son is working as a paramedic, and I discussed my near-death experience with both of my children. My near-death experience has been accurate in other respects as well. There was a shift in the way I related to my mother. We no longer talk. She is quite disoriented and currently under the care of my sister. When I was 40 years old, I disclosed my near-death experience to my mother. She explained to me that the work I needed to undertake was of a spiritual kind. What about the war? What happens next is still up in the air, but I am aware that I will perish in that. After presenting me that battle scene, I lost all further awareness of my previous existence. I believe that someone shoots me, but only time will tell.